Good afternoon. I will call the meeting to order at 1:01 p.m. for Monday, July 10th. And I would ask if there's any added items. We'll start with CAO Williams.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. Two things for Council's consideration for change. One is an addition to the closed session section, number 8, the item number 3, which would be FOIP section 16, sorry, harmful to business interests of a third party, with parentheses for real estate. The second thing is item 5F under new business, secondary suites. I'd like to move that under delegations and presentations, so that 5F would become 3A, if those two changes are acceptable to council.
Thank you very much. I would also like to point out that the sections on our agenda for item 1, FOIP section reading 17 should read 16, as well as item 2, FOIP section 17 should read 16. Are there any further added items or changes to the agenda? All right, hearing none, then I would now ask for adoption of the agenda as amended. Councillor Ryan?
Oh, thank you very much, Mayor Dahl. Good afternoon. Move that we adopt the agenda for regular council meeting for Monday, July 10th, as amended.
I will call for the vote, please. Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. On page 3 of your agenda, please, the adoption of previous minutes. I am looking for consent from council and would ask at this time if you have any changes or if we can call for consent. All right, we're good for calling for consent on item 2A. We are now moving down to delegations and presentations number 3, where we are moving item page 56, secondary suite incentives, to delegation. And we're bringing up James. The mic is yours.
There we go. Good afternoon. Thank you, Your Worship, councillors, members of the public. The Planning and Development Department has identified a large number of illegal secondary suites throughout the municipality. So we've come up with a plan to hopefully bring more suites into compliance. I just have a quick slideshow to run through that kind of highlights the problems we're facing, and then I'll refer back to the RFD when I'm done. So the main concern with secondary suites is there are several legal suites within the municipality. We don't have a firm count as to how many there are, obviously. These suites have not been inspected and do not necessarily meet zoning or code requirements. So internally, we've talked about how the Planning and Development Department should be identifying and addressing these suites, and what potential initiatives we could provide to bring existing illegal suites forward to obtain the appropriate approvals. So a bit of background information. Secondary suites were first introduced to the Alberta Building Code in 2006. Which actually came into effect 2007. It was introduced into the Alberta Fire Code in 2006, which didn't come actually into effect until 2009. And it was added to the Town of Olds Land Use Bylaw in 2009. There is some differences between the Fire Code and the Building Code, specifically around independent heating systems. between the suites. So the common safety issues that we're identifying in these suites are bedroom windows that are too small for appropriate egress, no smoke alarms or no batteries, or they're improperly placed. There's no fire separation of the suite, no secondary exit or proper separation between the suite and the furnace room, lack of handrails or guards, and lack of independent heating systems. So as a municipality, we have a responsibility when the safety codes officer, either fire or building side, is aware of a secondary suite, it's their responsibility to ensure it's safe and meets the code requirements. If the suite does not meet the zoning requirements, planning staff becomes involved to follow through and ensure compliance with the LUB. And if the suite is not compliant and the owner chooses not to proceed with upgrading the suite, the safety codes officer requests that the suite is vacated. So we currently have two methods of approach for dealing with secondary suites. One is through an owner-initiated process, and one is through a complaint process. I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but basically if an owner volunteers to come forward and seek information on upgrading their suite, generally it is when they're looking to sell their house, or if a new buyer is looking to buy a house and bring that suite into compliance. The suite is inspected, a list of deficiencies is created by the safety codes officer, and then the owner can either choose to follow through with the appropriate upgrades and approvals necessary to bring it into compliance, or they can choose to vacate the suite. And the complaint process is a little different. So complaint is either brought forward through the planning department, through the fire department, or through Alberta Health Services. At that point in time, there's a joint inspection taking place with those three agencies. Any immediate life safety concerns are asked to be corrected, which oftentimes is a lack of proper smoke alarms. Potential requests to vacate the suite under severe circumstances, which is typically initiated by Alberta Health through a health order. Otherwise, the owner is advised to make an application to bring the suite into approval, or it has to be vacated. So in an effort to increase compliance of secondary suites, we've, as administration, have come up with a few different solutions that hopefully would incentivize owners to come forward and bring their suites into compliance. So we have less of these illegal suites that may pose risks to safety. So we're proposing three different incentives to be in place for a period of 2 years. So the first is waiving development fees associated with secondary suites. The second is relaxation of parking requirements. Currently, the LUB states that one additional off-street parking stall is required. Our feeling is that if the secondary suite has been operating, we haven't received any complaints about parking, it's clearly not an issue, so we can move forward without that additional requirement. And the third incentive is a relaxation of the square footage. So the LUB states that a secondary suite may not be greater than 80 square meters and not more than 40% of the total area dwelling. The reality is, in a lot of these older homes, the secondary suite takes up the vast majority of the basement and therefore pushes it above that 40%. In our mind, again, if that suite's been operating, it doesn't make sense for the owner to come in and wall off a portion of their basement just to meet that requirement. We've put forward a recommendation for those three incentives. Council, of course, is able to choose any or all that they may be interested in moving forward with. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would open the floor then to council, and we'll start with Councillor Blatz.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan, through you to our development officer. So with the waiving of the development fees, remind me exactly now, what do we charge now for an existing fee for a secondary suite?
It's currently $300.
$300. But anybody else who's been compliant has come forward and paid for that $300, have they not?
That is correct, yes.
And so I guess my concern with this is, if we waive this $300 and other people have been compliant, but these other folks have had illegal suites for some time, they've generated income based on that. And even though perhaps we've had no complaints about parking or other issues, they've been able to generate some revenue. So that's my concern with waiving this, $300 to them. I still think that at some point in time, they need to be coming forward, and I've also heard the rumor several times of very many illegal suites within our community. And usually it's through either the real estate or, general conversation with other folks who've tried to purchase a home and have found out at that point in time the suite is in fact illegal. So that is my concern, that I feel it's probably a bit unfair to waive $300 for these folks when they've generated revenue so far, and other folks have done the legal route and gone the proper process. So those are my comments on that.
Thank you, Councillor Blatz. Any further comments? Councillor Ryan?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. Through you to our development officer. Can you tell me, with regards to some of the safety issues, so if we have somebody who has an illegal suite, they come forward and they say, yes, we have an illegal suite, is our first stop to inspect then? And then what happens afterwards when some of these safety issues, like if there is a bedroom window that's too small, or even a fire a separation, how long do we require the then person who is the landlord or owner of the building to do the corrections to make it so that it's no longer putting a tenant at risk?
Sure. So yes, the first thing we do is the safety codes officer goes and inspects the suite and comes up with a list of issues. It's up to his discretion to determine what he feels those high-risk safety issues are. And tenants or owners are generally given 45 to 90 days to rectify those issues. The one caveat to that is smoke alarms usually is fairly immediate, within a few days, just because it's easy to get that rectified.
You done, Councillor Ryan?
Well, I just wanted to make sure that we're, once they've been identified as having, putting their tenants at risk, and that something like that is solved right away. And then if they're not, so I take it that if it's not going to be addressed, such as a window or a firewall or whatever, which is fairly major undertaking to fix, then would they be closed down, or what's the situation there?
Yeah, so if the owner chooses not to rectify the solution in the time frame given, then an order is given for the suite to be vacated.
Thank you. Councillor Blatz, and then I have a comment.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. So then if these suites are supposedly vacated, how do we police that, or how do we monitor that situation to ensure it's been done? How can we monitor that situation?
So there is an inspection that's done after that time period if an order's been sent to vacate the suite. That's done once to ensure the suite's been vacated, and then moving forward, again, it would fall back into a complaints-based process, or if the owner goes to sell is generally how we re-identify those issues currently.
Councillor Daly?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. So my comments are very similar down the same lines as Councillor Blatz in that we have citizens of Olds that go down the right path and they get the permits and they do the building and the construction to fall within fire and building codes. And then we have people that insisted on continuing to rent out basement suites or secondary suites in their homes that do not comply. And now we seem to be bending the rules for those people that don't comply. And I'm just a little concerned about that, in that are we actually helping the problem here any, or are we just letting some people kind of slip through the cracks? So that would be my first comment. The second thing is any of the other municipalities doing anything similar to this, or is this something that we have developed internally within the town of Olds, and something unique that we're trying out to try to get all these suites in compliance, which I feel is a huge safety issue if they're not in compliance. So I'm all in favor of enforcing it. I'm just wondering if this is the right fix or not. Thanks, James.
I would say these specific incentives were created within the municipality. Secondary suites obviously are a problem that multiple municipalities face, and municipalities have come up with all sorts of different incentives or changes to regulations to bring more of these suites into compliance.
Thank you. I'll go ahead with Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. Through you to James, and James, thank you for the information. I just have a question. Could you explain a little bit about the development fee? Is the development fee the same as the development permit? Under what situations do you require to pay the development fee? If we have a secondary suite without smoke detectors, does that require a development fee payment? Just looking for a little bit more background around the development fee and what it encompasses.
Sure, so that fee is collected if somebody comes forward to complete a development permit for a secondary suite. So if an inspection's been done and an order has been issued to rectify those safety concerns, a development permit may or may not be required depending on what those issues are. If it's a matter of building firewall, changing entrance or egress, those generally would require a development permit, so that $300 fee would apply in those situations as well.
Right, but supplemental,
Can you
truly a supplemental?
Continue, Councillor
Thank you.
Wilson.
But, and again, something like a smoke detector would not require a fee, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah,
That
okay.
that doesn't require a development permit, so there wouldn't be a fee applied in that situation.
Good. Councillor Walsh and then Councillor Ryan.
You know, reading through this, I have no problem with this going forward. This has been dealt with for many years in many municipalities. It's never ever going to go away. Given our very low rental occupancy rate here in town, this is always going to be an issue. As a young guy, I think I probably lived in quite a few of these suites at one point in time, but it's reasonable. And I don't think people who have paid development fees in the past are going to be upset over this if we're working to make it a safer community through just volunteer compliance to illegal suites. I don't see any other way that you can move forward. You know, it's very, very difficult to force anybody to make these changes. And it has to be pretty well voluntarily. And the easier you make it to volunteer, I think I support this.
Thank you. Councillor Ryan?
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. I don't really have a major problem with offering these incentives. I just don't think they're going to be effective enough to actually target the ones that are actually abusing the system with regards to creating an at-risk situation for tenants. My concern is that the people who realize that they don't have a firewall or don't have a proper egress are not going to be coming forward just because we waive the development fees or parking or square footage. My concern is that I think we're still going to get complaints regardless of what we do. I don't really have a problem with with what's being proposed. Hopefully, some people will come forward and register their suites and realize that they're not in compliance and will do something. But I think that there's some of the ones that maybe already realize that they're not up to snuff, well, will not necessarily come forward to do that. But that's my feeling.
Thank you. CAO Williams, and then we'll go back to Councillor Wilson. And
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. And just to touch on something Councillor Ryan just said, and certainly what Councillor Walsh brought up as well, some of the logic of administration bringing this forward, we're certainly not going to bring all non-compliant secondary suites into compliance, and that's not the intention of this. We're hoping certainly to get some, but when Councillor Walsh mentioned the rental market shortage that exists here, the fact that the Olds College is bringing in significant more international students over the next several years is part of a PR campaign as well. That even if people have potential secondary suites in their home, hopefully they can become aware of what's required before doing that, along with hopefully catching some of the stragglers who existed for some time. Because as James mentioned, the building code and fire code respective changes in the last 10 to 15 years. Not everybody is even aware of those. I'm sure there's lots of people who know their secondary suite's not in compliance, but there's also people who just thought they were renting out their basement and block their upstairs access to the basement, and therefore you're creating an illegal secondary suite with no proper fire egress. And from the municipality's point of view too, we're not going to make more tax dollars assessment. There's absolutely no tax implication. Trust me, I checked on having a permitted secondary suite. But should something go horribly wrong, which we hope it doesn't, I think it also shows we've been proactive on this, trying to encourage people to self-comply, because we'll never be able to enforce our way out of this, really. It's just too big of a problem in a small college town. So that's some of the logic we've put into this bringing forward. So.
okay, I have a comment, but go ahead, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I will be very brief and further to the CEO's comments. And I support, and Councillor Walsh and a few others, I support this initiative. We realize, as has been stated, there is an affordability housing, if I use the word crisis, availability, I guess. And I look at this as a termite approach, right? And if we just take small little bites out of this, and if we can convince or compel one or two holders of these suites that are non-compliant to come forward as a result of these initiatives and incentives, I'm all for that. Obviously, safety, a huge concern when you talk fire detection, carbon detection, firewall protection, egress. So if this prompts one homeowner to come forward, I think it's successful, and hopefully there'll be more than one. So I support it.
Thank you very much, James. I actually applaud the manager of planning and infrastructure in your department for having the courage to move forward and create something that's different when we are all looking for solutions. My question to you is, how did you come up with a 2-year period? Why not a 1-year period or 6 month? Where did you get that from?
Sure. So some of these changes that are required, such as changing out a window, for example, adding an exit, building fire separation, you have to go through the process of getting a contractor, getting that materials ordered, construction completed. We felt 2 years was a long enough window that somebody could go through that process, figure out how much it's going to cost them, and at least start construction.
Thank you for sharing that. Councillor Daly?
Thank you, Mayor. So going back to what I said, like, I'm in favor of trying to get these illegal suites in compliance with fire and building code. I believe there is a huge safety factor there, as Councillor Wilson has indicated, about the number of different things that can go wrong, and God forbid if something does go wrong. And so I'm in favor of this, but going forward, would we be able to get a result of how effective this program is if it gets implemented into the system? Can council get a report at a later date, maybe in a 6 month, 1 year year and a half time period, just to see whether this is actually working or not, and whether we're addressing what we want to get done here as far as safety compliance.
James?
Yeah, this should be a fairly easy metric for us to track and report back to council.
Very good question. Thank you very much for your presentation. Councillor Bratz?
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. Just one final comment. I don't want it to be misinterpreted from my comments that I'm against having affordable or attainable housing. I recognize that there isn't a shortage. I just think it's unfortunate that we have to offer incentives to have people come into compliance, particularly when there could be safety issues. And, and I also understand that there's been many changes to the safety codes and the building codes over the past few years, which might impede some of these people. I think I'd be more apt to be in favor of waiving development permits for those folks because they didn't have any choice. But I also understand and recognize that we do need, and I really hope that this doesn't encourage a lot of people not to bother to come forward and get a development permit just because we waived this time.
Thank you very much for everyone's comments. I'd ask for a motion at this time, please, to be put on the floor. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I'd make the motion that council approve the following incentives for a 2-year period to encourage compliance of secondary suites. Number 1, waiving of development fees for existing secondary suites. Number 2, relaxation of parking requirements for secondary suites. And the third being relaxation of square footage requirements for secondary suites.
Thank you. Do you have a question? Marcy?
Thank you, I do. Will there be a time frame on the 2-year? Like, will you set when it starts and when it ends? Or are you just going from today's meeting?
I'll ask our CAO if he feels that should be included.
Could you repeat that, Marcy?
Sorry, the motion just says for 2 years. Are we starting from today's date, or are they going to say an actual date that this will start and end from 2 years?
I think effective the motion date is fine.
Thank you very much for that question, Marcy. Councillor Ryan?
Thank you very much, Mayor Dahl. I just wanted to find out through you to our CAO whether or not we should be putting in a compliance of existing secondary suites. It just says secondary suites, and I'm not sure whether or not we should say existing because of it being, a difference between these and new.
Very good question. I'll ask our CAO Williams.
Yeah, I think that's a fair clarification to add existing before the word secondary.
Would you take that as a friendly? Thank you. Thank you. Very, very good. Councillor Ryan? So it's friendly. We won't amend the motion from the original motion. And now I will call for the vote. Those in favor? That is carried. Thank you for all the conversation in regards to this, and I will now send you back into your agenda, please, and go back to page 9 for bylaws. Thank you, James, Mr. Crozer. All right, page 9, item 4A, bylaw 2023-19, land use bylaw 123 amendment. We are looking for consideration for first reading and to set public hearing date. So I will move forward, or would you prefer to speak to this? If council has questions, we'll ask after the motion. So I would ask for a motion then to give first reading to put this on the floor. Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move that council approve that bylaw number 2023-19 to amend the land use bylaw be given first reading.
Thank you, Councillor Daly. Would there be questions at this time from council then? None? Okay, I will call for the vote. Those in favor for first reading? That's carried. Thank you. All right, and we will then move forward to set a public hearing date. Councillor Blatz.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move that council sets Monday, August 28th, 2023, at 1 p.m. in council chambers as the date, time, and place for a public hearing on bylaw number 2023-19.
Very good. It's clear on our schedule. Unless council changes this otherwise, I will call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. We'll move right down to item 4B then on page 13. Looking again for consideration and first reading and to set a public hearing date. I'd ask for a motion, please. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I make the motion that council gives first reading to bylaw number 2023-20.
Thank you. I will call for the vote. Those in favor? Thank you. And Councillor Walsh for the public hearing date.
Thank you, Mayor. I move the council set Monday, August 28, 2023 at 1 p.m. in council chambers as a date, time, and place for public hearing on bylaw number 2023-20.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. I will now call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time today. We'll move to new business now, please. Page 18 of your agenda. And we have a request for the Mount View Seniors Housing Foundation Golf Classic sponsorship. One note I will make, depending on council's decision. The sponsorship is for 2 participants, and I would note that the 2 participants am recommending will be CAO Williams and council members. So any council members that would be, if we so choose to approve this, interested, please send your names in and we could move forward from there. Go ahead. I would ask for a motion. Councillor Blatz?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move that a silver sponsorship level in the amount of $1,500 be approved for the Mountain View Seniors Housing Foundation 2023 Golf Classic.
Thank you. Are there any further questions to this? These are Mount View Seniors Foundation is typically one that we have budgeted for, but I believe this is the last one we have budget for. Is that correct, CEO Williams?
Yeah, the sponsorship budget in this line item has $1,500 left. So.
Thank you. If there's nothing further, I'll call for the vote. Those in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much. Moving down now to page 29 of the agenda for Alberta Community Partnership Grant. I'll turn this over to CAO Williams.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. The Mountain View County has submitted this request to partner as a managing partner on an ACP application to create an emergency social services plan for the Mountain View County region. If you recall, the ACP program, which we were approved for this year for the area structure plan to our newly annexed area, does require municipal partnerships and to name a managing partner. The rationale for this is to complement our regional and our individual municipal ERPs, emergency response plans, and social services office brings in those agencies, local and provincial, that can provide the non-life-saving rescue services provided by our standard fire department and emergency management functions. So I think it's a great idea. Thank you to the county for bringing this forward.
And thank you for that description. I'll ask for a motion, please. We'll separate these, and we'll start with Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move the council approves and directs the Chief Administrative Officer to apply for the Alberta Community Partnership Grant to create a regional emergency social services plan. And let me say that after the tornado that hit just south of town, down near Carstairs, Didsbury area, this is a much needed. These plans are much needed.
Totally understand. Councillor Walsh, you have a question?
Yeah, just clarification. I support this, but I'm just curious if there are just going to be any capital requirements. So when I see AHS has the ability to inspect and approve facilities, that back of my mind says capital requirement, but I'm just curious.
Fair question. Good catch. Nothing that through this grant application would behold us to a capital requirement, but you're right that if we want a certain facility designated for a certain purpose, there is the chance that AHS would require upgrading, but that would be a separate decision of the local body who that facility rests in.
Thank you very much. It's good for us to be proactive and move forward to try and receive, but really appreciate your question, Councillor Walsh. Anything further for that? Good. I will then call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. And I saw the second motion over here. Was it you, Councillor Blas, that put your? Oh, I'm sorry. He's hiding behind there. Okay. Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that council name Mount View County as the managing partner for this grant application.
Thank you. I'm certain they'll do an excellent job. If there's no questions, I will call for the vote. Those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. We'll move now down to page 41 of your agenda, please. And that's item 5D, policy 804C for Mountain View Power. And we have, sorry? Oh, I missed you. Yeah, okay. We are 5C, page 38. We're going to backtrack, and I'm turning this over to our Chief Administrator Officer, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. At the council meeting of June 26th, there was a petition filed with the legislative clerk by one of the attendees in the gallery that day regarding the Miller Meadows Area Structure Plan amendment. The petition was submitted with, sorry, how many signatures again? 56 signatures, which, to back up a bit, petitions are a spelled out process in the Municipal Government Act, and unless deemed otherwise by the municipality, 10% is the threshold to consider a petition valid, 10% of all eligible electors, or population rather, I believe. That would put us just over 900 as our base requirement, so 56 falls quite a bit short of that. So this is for information within the CAO's power. I have deemed the petition invalid and just looking for council to accept that as information.
Thank you for the time and effort that your staff have put in towards this, Councillor Blatz.
I was just going to make the motion.
You happy to accept that?
I move that the Chief Administrative Officer's report, declaration of sufficiency on petition to amended the Miller Meadows Area Structure Plan, the Douglas petition, be received for information.
Thank you. There was no questions. I'll call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. Now we are on page 41, policy 804C Mountain View Power. Go ahead, CO Williams.
Thank you again. So, a little bit unorthodox. This is the first time council is seeing this policy at a council meeting. I did mention it in my CAO report at last Monday's PMP, or last Tuesday's PMP session. So the first thing in front of you is a draft 804C Mountain View Power Policy, which is relatively brief, but in my opinion takes what we have talked about over the last 10 to 12 months about Mountain View Power and its proposed process and intent, and provides high-level guidance based on that. You'll see some general terms in Section 1, and in Section 2, funding distribution through the Community Grants Program, which has a standalone policy council's already approved, community healthcare initiatives, general sponsorships, and community events. Section 3 deals with out-of-scope funding, just that council has the discretion, but only council to approve requests that are outside of those distribution formulas in Section 2, and then Section 4 just creating a reserve, both to transfer operating surpluses for future use, but which also be used in the future once we may require prudential obligations be met. The second thing was a draft budget 2024. Obviously, it's not quite budget time yet, but just for information's sake, this is how we see the budget being presented to council on an annual basis, as simple as possible. There's obviously a few things in there that we have to track: bad debt, credit card expenses, a small amount of administration, marketing, etc. And the revenue side is even more straightforward. The third and final thing is just a brief snapshot as it existed last week on our prudential obligations. Just to remind council and those watching, it is a tricky term, but the prudential obligation is something set out by the Alberta Energy System Operator, or AESO, that requires every electrical customer in Alberta to essentially make a deposit. Now, the customer doesn't have to make the deposit necessarily, but the retailer does. So right now we have just over $1 million in Prudential security through a variety of vehicles, customer contributions, where Mountain View Power customers have paid $100 to $200. Our own cash of $100,000. A town town LOC, which is actually our GIC, securing it for $600,000, which is also interest accruing. And then utility nets contribution as the retailer, as $190. Our current requirement with AESO, based on our customer count, is $820,000. So we have a fairly substantial buffer in place right now. Be several hundred customers, by several, probably a bit more than 500 customers we could still sign up without any Prudential cash calls. So we're in a good spot, I would reckon, for the next 2 years at least. So happy to take questions on that. The rationale for bringing it forward today was if council felt comfortable, it's good to have some guidance as we start to grant report on the 3 grants given out in May and get ready for that October intake for the second community grant program. And
Thank you very much for this information sharing with council today. And I would open the floor if there's any further questions. And we'll start with Council Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I just have a quick question for CA Williams and a comment. I guess I just want to say thank you for creating a policy on this and making it nice and short and simple. It's nice to see that we're not bogged down with a lot of details we don't need. I do have one question, though. Would this policy that it would be putting in place, and also with the budget that I see going forward, we had talked briefly about possible wages later on if we were going to hire somebody to do marketing for it. Would that preclude, would that make any changes to the policy, or it just would make a change to the budget? So that was the only question I have.
Yep, good question. We spoke with that a few weeks ago, and the rationale for not including it is that the proposed FTE count for next year that we brought forward during that time. So, for example, if it's going to be our business development coordinator, for instance, that we would branch off a portion of that salary through the Mountain View Power promotions and public relations piece. But that's something will be an option for council September, October, first draft of budget. Yeah.
Mr. Walsh.
Yeah, I also appreciate the simplicity of it, except for 2.2 community health care. I think that's too simple. Healthcare has, well, I consider it a big black hole, and every dollar we even bring in could easily be sucked into that. I would much prefer to see more parameters around that. Like, it's such a wide open statement that I'm going, it could be anything, and people reading this will interpret it as anything. So I probably wouldn't support this because of that statement. I would rather see some parameters put around it, a policy like 2.1, but yeah, this statement is just too broad for my liking.
Would you like to respond to that? C.O. Williams.
Thanks, Mayor Dahl, and thanks to Councillor Walsh. And fair, it is rather broad. The intention is for the newly created Attention and Retraction Committee, but also not to limit it too narrowly. My thought, which of course council's free to disagree on, that 2.2 is broad, but the annual budget council approves can really dictate that just by not funding it at any more than what, for example, the committee may require. But there may be a better way to word that. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but happy to take suggestions.
That's a very good explanation in my mind. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl, and through you to the CAO. Just as a follow-up to Councillor Walsh's question, so you mentioned that the budget allocation will be a determinant, and ultimately, at the end of the day, the intake will be open to any and all requests, ultimately then coming back to council to decide, correct?
So, yes. 2.1 is the bulk of the funding, which is a competitive process, so that comes to council to decide. We are hoping to get that adjudication committee of Mountain View Power customers in place to recommend to council. The council will have that authority. If you, Marcy, can you scroll down to the budget again, sorry? And I'll try to give anecdotes as best I can other way. Yeah. So for the advertising, public relations, that part won't come to council as frequently. It's a very much administrative decision. But if you're talking about sponsorships, same thing. This policy is still beholden to council's policy on sponsorships, where the CAO has $500 or maybe $1,000. I can't remember exactly. Anything else, like for instance, Oldstoberfest, which was funded through here, if you remember, that would have to come to council. So I would have some discretion, administration would have some discretion, but only at that $500 threshold or whatever that number is. Healthcare, that would probably more of a standing item. The reason why, because the town has to provide something if we want to leverage other funding. So for instance, the Mountain View County matches the town's contribution in sundry for their A&R committee, and they've given indication they'd be happy to do the same based on the town's contribution. Same thing, RPAP, which is the Rural Health Professionals Attraction and Retention Program, they also have a grant program in place for, I believe it's $1,000 or $2,000, but it does depend on not necessarily matching, but local participation. So the healthcare, unless council wants to branch it out, that's their request. But at $10,000, it would probably stay just at that one use, unless council deems otherwise. But that would require a budget increase, of course.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl, and again, through you to the CAO, and not a supplemental question, an additional question along the same lines, though. So something like the catch-all item 3, I think, out-of-scope funding. For something like if this council want to consider a bursary or a scholarship type activity, whether it was on a one-off basis or something continuous, I don't think we specifically budgeted for the catch-all of out of scope. So how would that work then? We would borrow from other functions or reallocate or?
Good question. Not exactly, no. That's where the reserve comes in. So this policy creates the reserve. So council's motion for out-of-scope funding, well, technically you can make any motion you want, would be recommended to draw down that Mountain View Power reserve by whatever amount for this purpose. So unless you want to make it a standing recurring item, in which case it probably should be a budget amendment. But I think the reserve drawdown would be the simplest for those one-offs.
Good questions. Thank you very much. I would entertain a motion at this time. Okay, we start over here. Councillor Ryan.
Thank you very much, Mayor Dahl. I move the council approves the Mountain View Power Policy 804C as presented.
Thank you. Good discussion. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. Now we will move down to page 46 of your agenda, item 5E. Excuse me, policy 902C, green space maintenance. Again, you can start this off. CEO Williams?
Thanks again, Mayor Dahl. And I don't have too much to add. It's largely unchanged outside of some small grammatical pieces from Monday's PMP. But as mentioned there, this policy exists as a first kick at the can, that we want to get some clear service levels in place for our green spaces, and Schedule A does that with mowing, weed control, and trees. And as we bring more Items to council at service level review, sports fields and trees, for example, upcoming items. This policy will be amended to reflect those. But it's largely unchanged from what you saw on Monday, and happy to entertain anything else they wanted.
Very good. Thank you very much. Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I'd like to move that council approve the revised policy 902C, green spaces maintenance as presented.
Good. I'll ask for any questions, if any. I will call for the vote. Those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. And at this time, I'd ask you to move to page 67 of your agenda, please, for the development permit DP 23082. And I believe Sherry's coming up. Thank you. Welcome, Development Officer Sherry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Council, and CEO Williams. This application is 23-082. It's for an accessory building for a chicken coop, or to use a portion of a chicken coop. And it will be for a maximum of 6 hens. It's located in an urban reserve district at the location of 4102 50th Avenue. Council is the development authority for discretionary uses, and this obviously is a discretionary use. The proposed accessory building that they want to use is 144 feet squared, and only 48 feet of the building will be used as the chicken coop in itself. With the run, and as per our bylaw, you're allowed to have 108 square feet, so they're going to have 48 square feet for the run and 48 square feet for the chicken coop in itself, so for a total of 96 square feet. So it falls within those parameters. And the applicant has met all the requirements and provided the licenses and documentation to go along with it. And we recommend approval subject to the conditions listed.
So I'm hearing you say they're free-range chickens. Very good. I'll open the floor to council. Any questions? Councillor Blatz?
I have no questions. Development Officer Sherry there, she answered any questions I had in her opening statements, but I would just make a motion then.
Need a motion?
I move that council approve development permit application 23-082 as presented, subject to the conditions listed in the attached draft development permit.
Very good. Thank you very much for your presentation and information. It was a very interesting read. I did find it very interesting. Thank you. I will then call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. All right, item 6A, page 74 of your agenda. This is our CAO Williams report.
Thank you again, Mayor Dahl. So included in the package on the CAO report section is the monthly reporter problem statistics. Marcy, you want to scroll down to those? And as you can see, we have a new winner this month that Parks and Trails has overtaken road issues. Parks and Trails issues largely involve weeds and uncut grass as and trees overhanging said trails as common complaints. But doing quite well closing them so far. Road issues obviously are ongoing. We do have no shortage of potholes and map cracking and other things, but our crews have been out both with the IR paver and with the shovel and bucket trying to rectify those. The action item list has a couple additions from the past month. Nothing too serious, but one thing to note on the closed item for the CSB, we are planning September PMP to bring forward the first set of review for council, and that would be traffic, animals at large, and unsightly property relating to graffiti is what we're planning for that September 3rd, perhaps, ish. That's all from there. Also in the report are some statistics from the speed radar that was set up on Winter Drive. We've learned that these are rather old machines that do not give regular information, so it's rather sporadic. I don't yet have the one that was set up on 57th Avenue, but I can send that out once the data's collected. So we have a June 27th, June 28th report, and a June 30th to July 4th. And that wasn't done on purpose. It was just the days that we were able to fix and take data from that machine. So as you recall, Winter Drive residents there have been contacting council, and it was discussed several weeks ago. So this information is meant to help inform council further. So it's a busy road, no question at all. Busier than I would assume we ever intended it to be 20 plus years ago when it was put in there. Roughly, we have around 3%, I believe. And Marcy, you scroll down a little bit further if you don't mind. I think I have the calculation. Just 3.6% of the vehicles that travel on Winter Drive, at least in the eastbound direction in these 5 days where data was recorded, of over 50 kilometers. The ticketable offenses, if I had used that word, which generally is between 5 and 10 kilometers over the speed limit, is when we would deem something enforceable, is obviously less than that. Council can have your own assumption, but to me this is not a significant amount of speeders at 50 kilometers an hour speed limit. It's up for discussion whether 50 kilometers is too fast on that road, but that is the rule right now, and I believe at 3.6% being measured over that is not egregious or out of the ordinary. Especially when we look at a lot of these offenses, especially the ones at 60 kilometers plus, occurred middle of the night, so to speak. So, but happy to take questions on that. I just have two quick things to get through, then I'll end. Council saw the final draft of the annual report, which a little late this year for largely due to our financial statements being delayed, but we're looking to also revamp that process to have something out more closely to year's end. So that would be February or March of 2024 for the 2023 annual report. But the public should be seeing that by tomorrow, and thanks to our communications staff and all departments for getting that data together. And also announced the recycling center at Trax, which is operated by the Mountain View Regional Waste Commission. It was announced several months ago that the commission decided to pull out of the recycling business and is no longer offering services effective July 31st. So effective August 1st, that facility will close, and residents are requested to take any bulk recycling to the Didsbury landfill. Of course, anything that can't fit in their blue bins already, because blue bin collection remains unchanged, but we are asking residents to use the landfill at Didsbury for the bulk recycling that was once at Trax and Co-op. And that's all I have.
And that press release is on our Town of Old's website, which is explained very well to the residents, the purpose and how we made the decision. So just for your information, Councillor Blatz.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan, through you to CEO Williams. So on these Winter Drive speed radar stats, will we continue, though, to set those machines up periodically just to monitor and get some fairly fulsome data on that situation?
Unless council thinks otherwise right now, I think Winter Drive is probably good for now. We have other areas of town we'd like to put them on, 52nd Street, for instance, before construction starts there, and perhaps even after, because it is in the western portion. Yeah, and a few other places in town will receive recurring speed complaints, but if council really wants to see more data for Winter Drive, I will certainly get those back there, but yeah.
Mental?
Yes, thank you. Okay, well, I'm all right with that for now until probably maybe school comes back, because it seems to be that's more, more of a typical time that people tend to be in a more of a rush, I guess. Have we reported back to the individuals who have contacted us either through you or through council on the data we've collected to date so that they're aware?
Yeah, Mayor Dahl has responded to the lead gentleman with this exact report, and I believe, Judy, your email just said that it was going to council for further discussion today. So,
Okay, thank you for that. I want to ensure that communication is still open with those folks.
Yes, communication is still open, and I'm certain that the information that he's received. He may be watching us as we speak, and we may hear from him from the future. We're just moving forward to see what happens in the future. I do believe I had, were you next? No, Councillor Ryan and then Councillor Walsh.
Thank you very much, Mayor Dolan, through you to our CEO. So just sticking on to Winter Drive here for a minute. You had mentioned about the speeding being, later at night. Do we have an actual, does that record the actual times that people are doing it? And maybe it'd be interesting to see what those times would be, because, they were talking about a lot of speeders during the day when kids are out and about. So I'd like to kind of see that in the report going forward, if we could see the times of when the people are going over the speed limit. Like we had 19 vehicles that were over the 50K. So it'd be interesting to see what time of the day that would have been at. And I concur with Councillor Blatz. I would like to see it go back to Winter Drive, perhaps in September, early September, just to see the change from, the time of year and the volume of kids that might be walking to schools or whatever. So if we could do that sometime in September, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walsh.
Yeah, I'm okay with the status quo on this, and I think Councillor Ryan is right. The volume is probably going to increase in the fall when schools are back in, so that would be an interesting stat to have. But I also notice in some communities and municipalities I drive in, they have a permanent speed. And I think from what I'm reading or understanding about speed control, people travel at a speed they're comfortable with, not necessarily being aware of their speedometer. And these things help in that regard. So I was just curious if we can get a price on that type of control. That would be a permanent sign that tell people what their speeds are.
I think Councillor Walsh is also referring, I also concur, I've seen them as well. They're solar, so we don't have to worry about powering them up. Go ahead.
Yeah, and good point. They're roughly $5,000 per sign. You would presumably want 2 signs for each side of the traveling direction, but if that can be a budget discussion. And they do record data and solar powered, so ought to be relatively low maintenance, vandalism aside. So
Do you know if they're cemented in the ground or are they movable?
hang on posts.
Good. Thank you very much. Was there any further questions? If there's no further questions, then, oh, I'm sorry. She's waving over there. Councillor.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. And I just was wondering if CEO would be open to answering a question of something that's not in your report. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I just wanted to find out now the reduction in speed limit for the school now / the playground zones. That started as of July 1st, correct? And how are we doing with getting signage out? I just wanted to find out about that. Somebody had asked me the other day about it.
The signs that we have were installed promptly. Unfortunately, they were back ordered, so they're not in stock yet. So any day now, but unfortunately, they're not up in most locations yet.
Okay, thank you. And also by Centennial Park, too. All right, thank you.
Councillor Blatz?
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. And to CEO Williams, further along for Councillor Ryan's comments, then perhaps we should be putting these speed limit signs in some of our newer locations too, so that we start to make people aware, and as a reminder and an education piece that, we have changed the speed limit in some of those areas to playground from school zones permanently. So that would remind our citizens that they need to slow down.
Thank you. I just, I don't have it, I'm not privy with all the information to date, but there is still some questions out there with regards to, for example, parking, the request on the north side of 50th and 51st Avenue that I'll send to our CEO. I just received it today, so I haven't really got the opportunity, but it's got to do with the Provincial Building and Community Healthcare Center area, and I'll have our CEO review that and report back to us. But that's all I have. Everyone's, thank you. I'd ask, do I have a motion? Let me go back. No, I'll, motion to approve. Counselor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I make the motion that the Chief Administrative Officer report be accepted for information.
Thank you. I'll call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Page 78, please, correspondence. I wanted to put this in the agenda, and it was good to see that. Is there any questions to the letter? It's nice to see we get some funding back to be able to put towards the road program. Motion, please. Councillor Daly.
I did hit the button, but I move that the correspondence and information report ending July 10th, 2023 be received for information.
Thank you very much, Councillor Daly. I will then call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. Very good. Thank you very much, all. We will be moving into a closed session. And I will read for our viewers that the closed session, when council goes in the closed session for continued participation in the virtual council meeting, stay online, please. In the live stream meeting platform, and the meeting stream will be replaced by a graphic and music will play. When the music stops, the meeting is reconvened. If you choose to shut down your live stream, please watch the Town of Old social media feeds where the reconvening time will be posted. Thank you. I would ask for a motion, please, then, for 3 items. And reminding you that the section is now 16 rather than 17. Who would like to make those motions? Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I would make the motion that council go into a closed session at 2:08 PM. Item 1, FOIP Section 16, disclosure harmful to business interests of third party related to planning. Item 2, also under FOIP Section 16, disclosure harmful to business interest of a third party related to board representative update. And the third item, FOIP Section 16, harmful to business interests related to real estate, with council remaining as well as legislative clerk.
Thank you very much. I will go ahead, legislative clerk.
Yes.